Welcome to Realcast, the weekly roundup of the real asset markets. I'm joined by Dan Innes for our MIPIM roundup. And I don't know about you, Dan, but I mean, my take on MIPIM was that it was positive in terms of the sector. Everyone was really pleased to see one another, but that certainly some of the exuberance of previous MIPIMs was definitely dampened by the global political crisis created by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And certainly everyone I met from Poland and the wider CE region, this was a fundamental topic. And we sort of learned firsthand of some of the support being offered by the real estate sector to help alleviate the refugee crisis. But one thing I felt came through very clearly was the support for the region. And certainly we've added a number of international speakers to the programme at the CE Summit in Warsaw on the 28th of April, who were very clear that they wanted to join us in Warsaw in person. Interesting also to see a focus on Egypt. And I had a number of conversations where both Northern and sort of Sub-Saharan Africa were mentioned, which is kind of the first time in many years at MIPIM. What were the some kind of takes that you had, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, similar sentiments to your opening remarks there. Fantastic event. Over 22,000 delegates registered. Chief Exec Ronan Vaspart was telling me with a huge smile on his face. I mean, I think it exceeded many people's expectations. That blustery weather kept people a little bit more indoors inside the Palais, which suited those who were exhibiting really well. It really proved that the industry, the sector, is really back with a bit of a spring in its step. You mentioned about some of those extraordinary initiatives, undertaken by some of the country pavilions, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, those giga projects and sort of innovative urban resort developments, from the people like Sodiq, Mountain View, LMD in Egypt, or Ajdan Retail and delegates Development Authority in Saudi. There's a real feeling that those are the regions where development and construction is going to be focused for the next few years. Like you said, there was a particularly moving moment on the Wednesday when the Ukraine stand had speakers talking firsthand about their own experiences, and there were all the names of the companies and the people who would have been attending MIPIM there on the side on the stand, and it really put everything into perspective. But as you said, it's great to see the real estate sector, reaching out and helping wherever it can. Regarding the UK markets, there were some impressive mini pavilions from many UK cities, not just the UK pavilion itself, but places like Newcastle, Bristol and Bath, Liverpool. And it was really good to see Britain's new housing minister, Stuart Andrew, also doing the rounds, promoting some brownfield development sites and planning changes. So that was very positive. There was also the issue of climate finance. That was a bit of a new phrase I hadn't heard until now, along with Crozet. Poignantly, the Egypt pavilion back in the frame there, because of course, COP27 is in Sharm el Sheikh this November, and there were speakers on their stand, including Lisette Van Doorn of ULI Europe, Guy Granger of JLL. Many sessions around the Palais spoke about sustainability, ESG, the tools that the sector can use to accelerate the fight against climate change. Bill Hughes of L&G, he tweeted that ESG had been more visible than ever at MIPIM. He said the contribution to society from the built environment should be measured on a standardized basis, and investors should be held accountable. Maybe the new happiness index that was also launched at MIPIM by a consortium, including Callison RTKL, that could be one such benchmark, who knows? There were a plethora of announcements, as you'd expect at MIPIM. One such deal which completed and announced at MIPIM was Eurofund Group and Henderson Park's acquisition of Silverburn Shopping Centre in Glasgow, that 100,000 square metre shopping centre for £140 million from Hammerson and Canadian Pension Plan. That triggered a whole load of conversations about retail. We heard Nuveen were launching the sale of one of Germany's largest shopping centres, the PEP shopping centre in Munich's Neuerplach, and that's for around €500 million. And EG reported that two of the UK's best known flexible office space companies agreed terms for a merger, and that's TOG, or the Office Group, and Fora, to create what they'll think of as the premier flexible workspace company in the UK and Europe. Together, those two companies have about 72 locations across London, Cambridge, Oxford, Reading, Bristol, Leeds, Berlin, Frankfurt, Hamburg. It's still not the 4 million square meters that WeWork has under management, but nonetheless, definitely want to watch for the UK and Europe. And lastly, just to keep us all on our toes, when it comes to bricks and mortar versus the new world of the metaverse. Our dear friend Mark Zuckerberg, he was speaking in this same week about the changes facing his firm to help break down the barriers of the physical world. And we are, of course, talking about augmented reality and the impact of the physical world. But I mean, CoStar reported that, augmented reality is still a few years off in trying to cram as much tech as possible into a pair of goggles. But if Zuckerberg's predictions are correct, analysts have said that, the ability for people to work virtually and not just on screens like we are now, but virtually, whilst being physically far apart, could have implications for office space demand, of course, or the need for mass transit solutions.
Interesting that around the metaverse, and that's something that we're doing with Realx.global platform. I think there's a number of people exploring what actually is going to be possible moving forward. Certainly in our event space, Club MIPIM had a full program there. And I guess some of the key takeaways were that ESG and impact were a key part of every kind of discussion. But I guess the key takeaways were, the S in ESG will become ever more important. And the challenge for real estate will be how to meet these requirements and aims, especially as the ESG bar gets set higher. Senior housing and healthcare markets are set to become much more competitive post-COVID. And actually, this was also confirmed by a number of off-the-record conversations with investors that I had who were looking to or actively planning to enter the sector. The supply-demand gap is going to be a major driver in student housing. Clearly, lots of opportunities in that sector. We had a couple of sessions on logistics and industrial, also looking at a very resilient sector in general, particularly to some of these shocks. And that if anything, the sort of shorter supply chains are going to inevitably lead to more logistics real estate being needed. I had a focus on Germany, very much looking at the safe haven status, and that would be something that Germany would maintain. And actually also in terms of the winning cities, discussion around that the cities have regained their momentum in a way post-COVID, and those concerns about what might or might not happen to the key cities, that actually the Londons, the Paris, the Frankfurts, those will all be actually just as important going forward, if not more so. I noticed a couple of smaller things as well. Bumped into Kevin Turpin, who's just been promoted to Head of Capital Markets CE at Colliers. Also had some really interesting interviews, not least great to catch up with Ricky Licker, who's CEO now of Dias, who was saying that cash is king, but now data is God, as they're focusing on the power of data and where they feel that's going to be influencing the sector going forward. We'll come back some more detail on that, not least the things that we saw on social media, like Andy Watson in his tuk-tuk as the start of MIPIM. Thanks very much for joining us, Dan. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week for our regular roundup of the real asset markets.